is my best kind of show notes, because we didn't touch one of them, not even one of them. I'm not sure which one is Paul Rudd and which one is Lane Green.
Final card here is the ultimate outcome.
Today is Take Your Dog to Work Day.
Oh, like Scooby-Doo.
Without further ado, his debut.
Sweet Caroline.
Everybody say hello to Sammy. Is it not good?
I'm just pausing so that you just are at the front of your screen.
I'm so enormously flattered.
Branding is not a bad blind date.
I'm gonna have to take a picture of this.
No, this is agape. This is love.
I really enjoyed this. You did do your homework. You asked great questions.
I'm flattered. Thank you. You just made my day.
Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're
How
insane!
Did I do that?
You're insane.
Well, welcome everybody. Happy Monday, July 20th. It is a new week. It is a new week of CoronaTV. And I am just, as always, on the edge of my seat because I'm so excited to have the guests. I'm humbled and honored by the guests. Today, I have Ian Altman. We're going to be doing impersonations of Jewish mothers. It's going to be awesome. He's going to teach us about maybe, arguably, inarguably, one of the most important things we need to worry about and concern ourselves and understand, which is selling. So many people are stuck at home at the moment. So many people aren't buying. How do you sell? How do you connect? How do you collaborate? How do you do this? Well, Ian is an expert, and he is going to be sharing some of his insights with you and giving away some stuff as well. I just going to tell you because it's just us, we're just friends here, but I'm super excited. I've got some pretty amazing guests coming up in addition to the ones that I have this week. I have an NBA legend coming up next week, an NBA legend. And I also have a best-selling author, a guy that I've read for decades upon decades, who's going to be on my show. I'll tell you more about that soon, but it's going to be awesome. Let me start off by just saying hello to a few people. We've got Steve Garfield, who says 7/20/2020. I don't know what that means. What is the 7? But it is the date, 7/20/2020. Is it the National Weed Day? I don't know. The National Schmutter Day? Maybe Ian knows. I'm not really sure, but I'm sure Steve will tell us. And Jan, I think, I don't know what you guys, you're my regulars and you're being too esoteric. Edgy CTV, I don't even know what that means. Maybe I'm a little bit off my game, but you'll have to explain what that is. Both of them will, I'm sure, be on the after show. Well, listen, some bad news. For the first time, my weight increased. So fat blogging, I could run, but I could not hide at the end of the day. My weight went up by 1.5 pounds. First time actually since March that my weight has gone up. I am not afraid. I'm undeterred. Maybe it's water retention. Maybe it's too much alcohol. I'm not really sure, but I can tell you for sure that my weight will be back down to 187 and maybe lower next week. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. It's National Get Out of the Dog House Day. So, Terry, if you're watching, I have one free pass, one get out of jail free card, and I'm going to play it when the time is right. I don't know whether it expires at midnight, but if it does, I'm still going to use it. So that's the special day. Now, I have a special guest, which I told you about, Ian Altman. He's the co-author of Same Side Selling and the founder of Same Side Selling Academy. It is a tongue twister, but what is very clear and very lucid and very succinct is how he helps people understand how to be better sellers. And I'm really going to spend a bit of time in my soliloquy talking about that. As I mentioned, we've got a great week. Tom Morris is a philosopher. I think Bob Pearson is a philosopher, but he just started a new agency. Jane Green is a multiple best-selling author, and David Berkowitz is the CMO's CMO. He's got an amazing community called Serial Marketers that he runs on Slack. They're all going to be my guests, and they're all going to be sharing with you, no doubt, some incredible insights. As you guys know, I've really boosted my newsletter. In fact, I'm now going to focus my newsletter on integrating closely and tightly with CoronaTV. If you want to subscribe, all you have to do is text CoronaTV to 66866 North America, or go to josephjaffe.com/subscribe, just to show you what the newsletter actually looked like this week. I actually published all 5 of the previous week's seated soliloquies with all the text, so all the script, so you could actually, take it as a transcript. You also have access to all the images that you can use if you want to. I have this week's upcoming interviews, and then I also do a little bit of my own debrief in terms of telling you what I liked about my previous week's interviews, a couple of highlights. And so if you'd really like to have a better package or merchandise of CoronaTV, all you got to do is subscribe, and of course it is free. There are a bunch of birthdays, and I just want to kind of whip through them as quickly as possible. My neighbor Ron Ophir, Mark Matu, who I think I met back in the Coke days, and I think he moved on to Samsung. All of my LinkedIn contacts on the weekend, and then of course on Facebook, Stuart Elliott, the New York Times columnist. It's his birthday today on Facebook, and then my LinkedIn contacts as well. So I hope you guys are having a good day. And if you're in the Northeast in the United States, keeping cool. We used to say keep safe. Now we say keep cool and keep safe as well. I do want to just single out one birthday. Joey Dumont, one of my regulars, one of our regulars. You will often see him on the CoronaTV after show. He's not on today because it is his wife, Debbie's birthday. So I want to wish Debbie Dumont a happy birthday. And now we get to our seated soliloquy. And you know that I integrate my soliloquy as much or as tightly as I can with my guests. But this one really is personal. This one is really my thoughts on selling. And it's something that I can't wait for Ian to react to and to be able to respond to, because it's something that I don't want to even say near and dear to my heart. It's something that actually I live on a daily basis, and it's something that I struggle with. I have to tell you that selling is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. There, I said it. Maybe it's because I suck at it. I mean, I really think I suck at it. I'm not just saying that. I also hate it because I see myself like becoming this greasy snake oil salesman, even though I'm not selling snake oil, and I don't think I'm greasy either. When I was a buyer back in the agency, the advertising agency days, I guess I just took all of the media sellers for granted. I had no idea how hard it was until the shoe was on the other foot. And maybe this is revenge or retribution. I didn't think I was a bad buyer, but still. Or maybe it's just because I wear multiple hats now. So when I transition from the guy on stage, the inspirational keynote speaker, the thought leader, to the upselling and cross-selling consultant, I feel like I compromise myself, and I sense a disturbing transition as my adoring fan in the audience becomes the cynical prospect. And in doing so, the whole balance of power shifts from myself to them. They own me now, and they know it. My confidence evaporates, and the lion that once roared on stage is now a whimpering pussycat. I've always felt that when a buyer doesn't want to buy, there's nothing anyone can say to change their minds. Or at least I know that I can't, or I don't have the ability to convince them otherwise. Or maybe it's not me at all. Perhaps no one's buying at the moment, in which case maybe I should just stop selling altogether, or at a minimum, dial back the intensity and focus on the new mantra, helping is the new selling. Well, that's exactly what I have been doing for the past several months, with a full heart and pure intentions. But something has to give, right? Because the last time a 100% altruistic business person ever made a go of it or success of it was never. Well, I'm curious as to what Ian has to say about that. And he certainly does have some strong thoughts about helping is the new selling. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Ian Altman is the co-author of Same-Side Selling. He built his own prior companies from zero to over $1 billion in value. He's the founder of the Same-Side Selling Academy. He's ranked, which is actually ranked one of the top 5 sales development programs globally. And Ian is recognized as one of the 30 foremost global gurus in sales. And you will see what I mean right now when I bring him onto the show. Welcome, Mr. Ian Altman.
Thanks so much for having me here and for contradicting all your best judgment and having me with you. So,
well, I mean, we know who to blame for this, right?
We do. I believe it's Ron Tite.
So it is Ron Tite, and we'll come back to him in a moment. Hold on a second, but there is a lot of smack coming out right now on the chat. First of all, Robert Collins says that my get out of jail free card can only be used today. But then my wife says then she gets one too. So I didn't know it was a quid pro quo. But I guess
I love that. I love that Terry has chimed in the comments.
Yeah, well, at least now she knows how to captive audience. Talking about running but not hiding. So she knows I've just got to be nice to her, otherwise she's gonna. There may be more comments. I can choose not to put them on the screen.
Of course.
So exactly. Leslie says I need a sales coach, Joe. So now finally, almost at the age of 50, I found out that I actually needed a coach. Ian, will you be my coach today for 45 minutes?
For today, I'd be happy to.
I appreciate it. And I actually feel like there are a lot of people that could benefit from your wisdom. But first of all, you agreed to come on the show with 2 conditions. And so I think it's important to see the world according to Ian Altman. Here are the rules according to Ian Altman. Number 1, don't drink great wine that hasn't been properly aged. And number 2 is don't follow Ron Tite. So I don't think I've broken either of those rules, have I?
Well, I mean, Ron was on a while back, and we haven't consumed any wine yet. So far, so good.
So now I'm learning how to be a better wine drinker. I mean, I certainly, no problems with quantity. But I'm still, I'll be honest with you, quality, I think I'm getting better. I mean, when you give me a very expensive bottle of wine, I fake the sniff, the swirl, and I go, wow, that was really good. Here's my problem. I don't really know when I'm drinking rancid wine. That's my problem. I'm just not sure if it's a bad wine or if the wine is bad.
Then you'll save a fortune over time because you won't know the difference. What I always tell people is all that matters is that you know what you enjoy. And the reality is that although people often know me as somebody who collects wine and loves sharing wine with other people, I'm not one of those people who has a mastery of all the adjectives to describe wine. So I have about 5 adjectives for wine, and that includes red, white, and sparkling. So I don't have a lot to go with. I just know what I like. And through tasting a lot of different wines and collecting wines, if I'm looking at a wine list, I have a pretty good sense of what's going to be a good bottle of wine to go with certain types of food. But there are people who know orders of magnitude more than I'll ever know.
Let me bring and attempt to very clumsily and clunkily attach or build a bridge between selling and wine.
Okay.
You go into a restaurant, you're trying to impress your significant other, or maybe it's someone you're dating or your friends, and the sommelier comes over with their 100-page wine list, and you are just intimidation or being intimidated now, and you're trying to fake a certain degree of knowledge. Are they really great sellers, or are they just bullies? I'm not sure.
Well, you know what, and the really good sommeliers basically can give you guidance on what's going to be the best wine to go with your meal at any given price point. So a true sommelier really knows what they're doing. I have a friend of mine who's what's called a level 2 sommelier. And it's funny because he's a business person. He's not in the wine and spirits business. He's not in the hospitality business. He runs CEO groups. In fact, he has a book coming out in the fall called Professional Drinking. That is guidance for people on how do you select wines or beers or things like that. It's actually, I mean, very, very timely. It's funny, as you were mentioning it, I was waiting for Jim to pop up. I'm like, there he is. But Jim Schlexer is writing this book. And there's times where Jim and I would be someplace having dinner, and the sommelier comes over. Yes, I'm the sommelier. And Jim says, oh, what level of sommelier are you? And the guy's like, well, I've never actually done any of the studying or tests. Okay, so you're the wine guy. Right? There's a difference. So the sommelier is a real distinction. And the good ones can really guide you. I remember there was a restaurant in Philadelphia, classic Italian restaurant, and they used to bring out what I called the wine almanac. It was like this thing was just this thick. Each page had a label, and then underneath they had listed all the vintages of that label and a price next to it. And this is before I knew anything about wine. And the sommelier comes over, and I'm having dinner, entertaining some clients, and he comes over and he says, might I suggest this? And it's like $1,200. I said, what else do you have in mind? and then he flips a few pages. How about this? And it's like, $600. What else do you have in mind? And then we keep going, get to about like $90 bottle. I said, yeah, something like that. What do you think? And that was my way of communicating to him. Here's about what I'm looking to spend for a bottle of wine. Now you can help me pick. But of course,
I was going to say you go lower,
exactly.
lower. You're getting colder.
It's like playing limbo.
Yeah, exactly. I can try and do a little bit of a limbo, a virtual limbo.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna actually try that next time, which is the next sommelier that comes over to me. If we ever go to restaurants again, I always caveat that, right? Yeah. I'm just curious, what level sommelier are you?
Well, there's that, and the interesting thing in terms of the sales dynamic is that in a consumer environment like that, where it's wine, oftentimes the sommelier will ask, well, so about what are you looking to spend? And I actually counsel people in the sales environment, one of the last things you want to ask people is, what's your budget? Because the reality is that it's not very telling, and it's almost like if your client gave you a completely ridiculous number, either high or low, somehow you have to adapt to that. No, you need to figure out what they're trying to solve, and then you can tell them, here's the investment required to solve that. As opposed to on the consumer side, someone says, here's about what I'm looking to spend, now what can I get for spending that? So there's always a difference between selling in the consumer space and selling in the business space. So
I want to talk about probably, I mean, you're going to cringe. This is going to be like nails on a chalkboard, but I've written 5 books. I do a lot of public speaking, and now with COVID, there's this weird, funky purgatory, world we're living in. And so I bet you I make one of the cardinal mistakes, which is, first of all, I've said, what's your budget? So like strike 1 for me. Strike 2 is I say, well, this is my rate card, but I'll work with you.
Yeah.
Is that a bad no-no?
Well, here's the thing. It's almost like, think about if you went to the doctor, and the doctor diagnoses a serious condition, and then you say, oh wow, can you solve it? And the doctor says, yeah, I can solve it. And you say, okay, well, how much is it going to be? Well, insurance will cover a lot of it, but it's still going to cost you out of pocket about $2,000. You wouldn't say, well, how much of the procedure can you do for $600? Right? It wouldn't work that way. And if the doctor said, well, look, the procedure is $2,000, but I could work with you. I've got a little bit of wiggle room. Would your confidence go up or go down if they said that? So ironically, your confidence would probably go down. And you'd think, maybe I should find a different doctor because I don't want to buy from the discount physician. Right? I don't want to get my treatment from the person who is running a special this week on whatever procedure I need.
Did you ever watch a movie back in the day called Johnny Dangerously?
Yes.
remember his mother is always going through procedures, and I think the doctor says, well, bad news, your mom's liver has to come out. And he goes, but there's good news. He goes, what's the good news? We're having a 2-for-1 special on kidneys. I mean, it was like something ridiculous like that. But that's a good point. But now let's stay on the subject of price for a second, because I've always found it interesting, even when applying for a job, where you can go through days, weeks, months of interviews, and nowhere in that process does money come into it, until right at the end, when the grand reveal. It's almost like, okay, now you can open the box, and that number could be woefully low if you're the applicant, or woefully high if you're in terms of the expectation if you're the company. Why is price always brought in right at the end?
Well, and it shouldn't necessarily be brought right at the end. In fact, so if you think about it, when people work through a recruiter, the recruiter is actually getting a sense from the company of their budgetary range, and from the candidate what they're looking for in terms of what's going to attract them. So they're trying to find that fit between the two. In a business context, one of the biggest mistakes is either talking about price too soon or talking about price too late in the process. So it's not like oh, it's terrible to wait till the end, or it's terrible at the beginning. Neither one is good. So at a certain point, once you have a sense of what someone's trying to accomplish, then you can actually have a conversation about what the investment might be to overcome it. See, I've done this research with thousands and thousands of executives on how they make and approve decisions, and people ask the same three questions everywhere around the world, whether it's companies that are relatively small startups to multi-billion-dollar multinationals. There are 3 questions that people consistently ask when they're looking to make or approve decisions, and you might want to know what those are.
I'm taking notes, man. What do you?
So the 3 questions that we find. So what I do is I put people through a scenario, and I say, okay, here's this fictitious situation. I put people in groups, and I say, here's this fictitious situation where someone on your team comes to you and says, we have to buy this thing. I call it a Gazettenblatt. And it costs $20,000. It takes 45 days for them to implement it, requires no resources whatsoever on your part, and they give you a 10-year guarantee. What are the 5 questions you would have to have answered to be comfortable making an informed decision to either say yes or no? Then, once they come up with a list of 5, I give them a short period of time to narrow it down to their top 3. It's the same 3 questions, and the 3 questions are this. The first one is, what problem does this solve? So
I'm taking notes, by the way.
I got you. So the first question is, what problem does this solve? The second question is kind of the flip side of that same coin, which is, why do we need it? And the why do we need it usually translates into dollars, meaning what happens if we don't solve this problem? And then the third question is, what is the likely outcome or result if we buy this thing? Not what did the salesperson say is going to be our result, not what do we think it is in a best case scenario, what's the likely result or outcome? So how do we come up with a likely result or outcome? Well, we want to hear from other people just like us who had a similar problem and what their outcome was, because if enough people just like us got the outcome we're looking for, then we feel pretty confident that those people can do the job. Now, the distant fourth in all this is, what are the alternatives? But the reality is, if we answer and we address these 3 questions really well, that fourth one of what are the alternatives becomes implied. So if the way you are selling today is not aligned with those questions, recognize that you're actually lengthening and complicating the sales process, not making it shorter. That means that instead of starting a conversation with somebody saying, here's what I offer and here's what I do, we should be starting the conversation by saying, look, I'm really good at solving these types of problems, these types of challenges for organizations, and for the right organizations, they tell us we deliver amazing results, but the way we approach that, it's not the right fit for everyone. I don't yet know if I can help you. Can you tell me a little bit more about what's going on so I can determine whether or not I might be able to help? And what that does, that pivots the whole conversation. So now they're convincing you that they have a problem worth solving, rather than you trying to convince them they should buy your stuff. And it's
I mean,
a subtle difference, but it totally changes the dynamic.
Well, I actually think it's not. It's not. It might be subtle in terms of execution, but to me, it hits like a ton of bricks. Which is when you make it about yourself as the seller, you are putting yourselves at a huge disadvantage as opposed to making it about the buyer. And you would think though that most people would get that, but I would assume that most people, that would be the wrong assumption, right?
Well, you know what? In your soliloquy, you talked about how it feels uncomfortable because you feel this imbalance. But if instead of thinking about it, and one of the things that my co-author Jack Quarles and I write about in the book is that in most books about sales, most systems that teach the concept of sales, it's either a game metaphor or it's a battle metaphor. In the game metaphor, there's a winner and a loser. In the battle metaphor, the loser dies. And then we wonder why there's this adversarial tension between buyer and seller. Of course there is, because we're playing it like a game. Instead of, what we should be doing is figuring out, okay, who do I help the most? Who can I have the greatest impact for? And those are the organizations that I want to focus on. And the people who I can't help that well, you know what? I'm not really going to extend extra effort. They have to really convince me hard. I'll give you a perfect example. Last week, you and I both do a fair amount of keynote speaking, or we did before all this craziness. And so one of the bureaus I work with contacted me and said, "Hey, I know you had a podcast episode a while back on diversity, and I've pitched you, and the client is really excited. Can you send me something about this topic of diversity?" And I said to him, I really appreciate you thinking of me. And yes, that podcast may be helpful. I just think it might be a little bit weird having a middle-aged white guy be your speaker on diversity. It would seem like almost meta in a bad way. So maybe, is it possible there's someone else who would be a better fit? And he said, well, I've got 5 people of color I presented, and none of them were really that compelling. And I said, you know what, I appreciate that, but let's just talk it through with the client a little bit and see how their audience would respond. And they said, that's a really good point. We haven't thought of it. Now, it's not because I didn't want to do the engagement. It's just because I was thinking in my client's best interest, saying, this isn't good for the bureau, this isn't good for the client. It's not the right message for them, even though the content might have been fine. It just wouldn't have been aligned. Similarly, I help companies who sell to other businesses. So I focus almost exclusively in the B2B space. The only exception to that is people in the wealth management space, because the way people make wealth management decisions is similar to how people make business decisions. But otherwise, if someone says, "Oh, can you help us on how we can sell at our retail store?" It's like, I'm not the right person for that. There's a whole bunch of people better qualified. I'm not that person. And so sometimes it's tough, especially when people are struggling for business, to walk away from business that may not be ideal because, well, gee, I could use the revenue. But what we have to look at is, look, it's not just about the revenue, because remember, those 3 questions are, what problems does it solve, why do I need it, and what's the likely result or outcome? So here's the interesting part about that part about the likely outcome. So when you're a customer, Joe, when you're buying something, who would you rather deal with? The person who's focusing on who needs to sign off on this, or the person who's asking you questions about the results?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the answer is results.
Okay, so do you think you might be inclined to pay more for the person who's focused on results than the person who's just focused on the sale?
Yeah.
Okay, how much more? If you had to put a percentage on it, what do you think?
Interesting. I don't know.
Okay, so let me ask. What's that?
I don't know. 33%.
A third. So the numbers range from anywhere from 10% to 50%. And let me ask you the same question. Let me ask you the same question in a different way.
Yeah.
How much less would you have to pay for it to be a good deal, but you don't get the results that you need?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? See, it'd have to be 100%. Like No matter what I pay, it's not a good deal if it doesn't do what I accomplish. So the mistake that most people make in sales is they're focused on the finish line being the sale. And the reality is that, so you say, oh, well, so here's my process. So I have initial contact. I talk about what their fit is. I give them a proposal. I get a contract. Yay! And there's your finish line. But what if you asked your client, what's the finish line? Your client is not going to say it's the sale. Your client isn't even going to say it's delivery. Your client is going to say it's the results.
So this is maybe one of the clearest, maybe the clearest understandings that I've ever had about the interesting intersection point and the difference between B2B and B2C. And I'll tell you why, because, as you know, I wrote Flip the Funnel, and my whole argument with the traditional funnel is that we think that our job is done when somebody buys the can of beans, not Goya beans, but the other beans. I'm just kidding. but it's actually beginning, especially if it's high touch, especially if it's high involvement, especially if it's a high ticket item. And I'd never quite thought of B2B that way, thinking, what does the flipped funnel look like? It's not even about acquisition and retention. It's about being able to say, in my case, right, I was hired as a speaker. I came in and I did this speech, but ultimately, what was the impact of that speech? And I always have looked at it saying, my job is to make the meeting organizer look good. But I suddenly see a little bit of a bigger picture, because the meeting organizer might look good because they got the right deal, etc. But what about, ultimately, who's the final customer, or who's their customer?
And the reality is, historically, most speaker bureaus and most speakers don't ask that question. So you'd be amazed how many times people will say, oh, well, so we've seen these videos and we're looking forward to having you come speak at our event. And I say, great, what is it that inspired you to reach out to me? And they give me that information and say, okay, so what are we going to measure 6 months down the road so that you and I know that we were successful? What kind of changes are you looking to achieve? And if these conversations were on video, almost every time you would see this. They would kind of sit back and then scratch their chin like, wow, we hadn't really thought about that. And the reality is that oftentimes what would happen is people would say, well, here's what we want to achieve. Okay, do you think that's feasible with one talk? Well, I don't know. What do you think? Well, my experience is if you want to achieve those results, then we're probably going to want to do a little bit of work in advance of that talk. Then we're going to want to have the conversation itself. And then here's the follow-on we should do over the next 3 or 4 months, and that'll help make this stick. Does that sound like it's worth doing? And now we're having a conversation about what the results are, and it's okay, so what you want to do is, and in my case it's easy because we're talking about sales, it's okay, so you want to increase the sales. Well, not everyone on your team is going to increase their sales, right? You've got some people who probably shouldn't even be there, right? Yeah, okay. So what percentage of the team do you think we could actually have an impact for? Do you think it's safe to say at least half of them? Yeah, okay. And of those half, I know you said you want to double sales, but if those half, all we did was increase their results by 10%, how much would that be? And the client's saying, well, if that half increased by just 10%, that would be $12 million a year. Okay. Because to do what I just described, the investment is about $70,000. What would you like to do? And now they've got something to balance it against. They say, oh, well, so it costs $70,000 to potentially get this $12 million. Now, how do they make that decision? What's my likelihood of getting this? Well, gee, even if I only got 10% of of the 10%, it's still 1.2 million compared to, okay, yeah, this makes sense. And so it's giving people so that you have a mutual understanding of what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and you have a mutual understanding of what the likely results are. And by the way, if there are any questions that are coming in that you want to fire in that we want to talk about too, I'm happy to do that as well. So however you want to do this, I'm good.
Yeah, no, this is great. I mean, as I said, I feel like every day I'm in a masterclass, which I love, and people watching as well. In fact, but we're also getting notes about things you say. So professional drinking book. In fact, I might have to ask you for a referral so that I can bring your friend in.
Of course.
As well, but except, well, you might have to do a little bit of a cameo where we have our wine and we learn how to drink professionally. I've always wondered if there was I can update that on my resume, professional drinker. But Ian, you mentioned a lot of interesting things there, and I've always been a B2C marketer by trade, by experience. Things that, as I said, I don't know what it is about you in terms of the way that you deliver, but I think there are things that I can relate to that I haven't related to with anyone similar in the past, and that's because you're a storyteller, and I can see the power of, and you're passionate, and you really believe in what you do, and you do what you love. All of that to me is apparent. But there are a few other interesting B2C things that were coming to the forefront. One is the subjectivity and the perception of value as opposed to price. And the other one is the consumer journey. And I think what you've done is you've been able to zoom out and really understand that journey, and maybe even help them understand it. In some cases, I would imagine sometimes that the buyer doesn't even understand the full extent of the journey because they themselves are siloed and bucketed into their own P&L and their own short-term deliverables.
It's you know what, you hit it dead on, and it's very flattering what you said. I'm going to capture that part of the recording and play it for my wife and children, so that way they see. Actually, someone believes I know what I'm talking about, and
you don't even have to play the dog box card yet. So that's
exactly. So the idea of this is that where you touch on this idea of the value and helping the client understand it. There's a concept that I teach, and it's in the academy that we'll talk about at some point in the Same Side Selling Academy, called the Client Success Roadmap. And the idea of the client or customer success roadmap is the idea of helping map out with your client the journey from our interaction right now to realizing measured results. So the idea is that many people in sales, someone teaches them, well, what we need to do is we need to map out the buyer process. And it starts from our first interaction and it ends when we get the sale. And the problem is that's not very appealing to the client. And then we want them to follow our goofy process for how we want to sell to them. Well, no one wants to follow that. But imagine if you said, for our clients who have had the greatest success, there's a process that we followed together that takes us from where we are now all the way to confirming the results with measurable outcomes. Would you be okay if I shared that with you? Who's going to say no? No, you know what? We don't want success. We're looking for mediocrity. And in fact, if you can come up with something that underwhelms us, that's our goal. You're not going to get that response. People are going to say, oh yeah, I'd love to hear that. Okay, well, so what we'll do is, right now we're trying to understand this. Once we hit this milestone where we have a mutual understanding that this is worth solving, then I'll include X and Y from our end, and that's a good time for us to include these two people on your end, because now, in order to make sure we get results, those people need to be involved also. And then, at this point, we'll do this, then we'll get procurement involved. Now, once we implement, here's what happens. Now we got to map out the 5 or 6 steps after they'd make a purchase. That details how we're actually going to confirm the results for them. Now, if we do that, the client says, wow, so one vendor mapped out everything from today to how we get results. And the other vendor said, what's it going to take for me to get you in this car today? You know what? I want to work with the vendor who's actually mapping out and knows how to help us achieve results, isn't just trying to make a sale. And that's what changes the dynamic, so that anytime your client pushes back on price is when we want to focus on results. So we could do something at a lower price point. I'm just concerned that if we do that, you're not going to get the results that you need. Because obviously I can't do the same work for less. Otherwise, I would have been overcharging you to begin with. So if you want this other scope of work done, I can do that, but I'm just concerned that it might put these results you said were important at risk. Did I misunderstand what you needed in terms of results? Because I want to make sure I'm not overshooting it. Now the client goes, no, that's actually what we need. That's a good point. And now the other vendor comes in and is just focused on the sale, doesn't focus on results. And when the meeting's over, the client says, yeah, but those guys are just trying to make a sale. Joe's people, they were focused on the results. We're better off with them.
I mean, it's apparent, right, when you talk about results, measurability, but there's also skin in the game, and there's a shared belief and a shared desire to actually to vest in that. And if we go back to the book for a second, and there are two words, right? How integrity and collaboration drive extraordinary results. There's your words, results, for sellers and buyers, not one or the other. But if you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about these two components, because there are many things you could have highlighted, but you chose to highlight integrity and collaboration. So what's so important? Why are these the two most important things?
Well, so on the integrity side, what it comes down to is this. We've all been taught by bad sellers how to react when we see someone who looks and acts like a seller, because people have been sold a bill of goods. You mentioned to yourself, well, I don't want to feel like a snake oil salesman, even though you're not selling snake oil. It's not because you think you would all of a sudden slip into that. It's because you know that people already have that in their mind. It's why when you walk into a store and the hyper-ambitious salesperson walks up to you and says, may I help you? Presumably they're wearing a mask at this point. They walk up and say, may I help you? What's our automatic response?
No, I'm just browsing.
Yeah, no thanks, just looking. Right? No thanks, just browsing. Why do we say that? Because we don't trust that they're actually looking out for our interests. Instead, whose interests do we think they're looking out for?
Obviously theirs.
Their own. Okay.
Right.
So if we don't lead with integrity, if we're not constantly thinking about, can I deliver the results that these people need, then what's actually happening is we're just perpetuating that same slimy salesperson persona. So instead, what we have to do is we have to say, look, I'm really flattered that you're interested in what I offer. I want to make sure that I can deliver what you need. Can you tell me a little bit about what sparked you reaching out to me in the first place? And so you're immediately, instead of saying, oh, I've got what you need, I'm sure you get the same ridiculous inquiries on LinkedIn as I do, and I'm sure many of the people who are watching get the same thing, which is someone who says, hey, can we meet on Tuesday at 2 p.m. so I can tell you how great my company is at XYZ that you and I know we don't need. Right? Oh, we're the best at, and my favorite is this, is, can I talk to you about outsourcing X to us because we're really cheap? It's great because I was looking for somebody cheap. Oh, wait, no, I wasn't. I was looking for somebody effective. Oh, yeah, my bad. Right? So I don't need your help.
Steve says they should ask what brings you into the store today, but isn't that still cliched, or it's definitely better?
You know what? So Steve's idea, and obviously Steve speaks a lot about integrity, and so I think that's a great way. That's a great way to go. I think also what you can do is imagine this. Imagine you walk into the store and the person says, "Oh, what brings you in today?" Using Steve's line, and you say, "Oh, I'm looking for this." Say, "You know what? I'm happy to help you. If you're more comfortable and you know where everything is, I'm here whenever you need me. If I can help you find anything, please let me know." You're probably going to say, well, no, don't go anywhere. Here's what I'm looking for, because they just did something that I referred to in the book as disarming. So what they did is they disarmed the notion that they were just there to sell something. They were actually signaling that it's more important for them that they help you than just sell something to you. So it's
so maybe a good line then would be, if you need me, I'll be right there in the corner. Or
exactly.
Or my name's Joe, and I'm the good-looking, handsome guy with the very loose-fitting T-shirt.
You look very comfortable. You look very comfortable in the schmott then.
There you go. There's your takeaway quote. All right, so how do I bring this back? So let's talk about the second one, because I think you started to allude to this idea of working with them as a partner, collaboration.
Sure. So my co-author Jack, as I often say, Jack, whose last name is Quarles, so you know that he's a guy who spent years in purchasing and procurement.
Right.
Exactly. But Jack and I spent a lot of time on this, which is how do we get the buyer and seller collaborating with one another? Because he's somebody who spent 2 decades on the purchasing and procurement side. And what he said is, look, the best sellers were the people who were collaborating with me, trying to make sure that we got a better return per invested dollar than we would through somebody else. And so it wasn't necessarily the cheapest price, it was what's going to generate better results for us. And so to that end, the idea of collaboration is this. When your client or prospect decides not to do business with you, one of 2 things has happened. They either don't believe that their problem is worth solving, or they don't believe in your ability to deliver the results they need, or both. So if we know that, then we have to have a mutual understanding about what problem it is they're trying to solve, why it matters to solve it, and have a mutual understanding about how we're going to achieve that result or outcome. So if I'm the salesperson, I believe it, but you as the buyer don't believe it, it doesn't count. If you as the buyer believe it and I don't believe it, guess what? It doesn't count because I'm going to undervalue whatever I'm selling. I need that mutual understanding and collaboration in order for this to make sense. Because if I don't have that, then there's that imbalance again. And that's why collaboration becomes so important.
I want to talk, as you know, because you've watched a few episodes of the show. When
Sure.
You saw your friend Ron Tite on it, that I try and do the stump, stump the buoy. It's a little Howard Stern reference there.
Sure.
So here is the quote, and this is an easy one, I think, right? Because it's one of the most famous quotes in all of selling, which now I've set myself up in case you don't know it. Nothing happens until someone sells something.
Yeah, I just forgot who it was, but I know.
And here's a clue.
Yeah, oh, I know. Yeah, I just, you know what? So I get the picture, but it's.
And it's actually been attributed to many people. So if you say anyone, including Ian Altman, I'll
Joe
go,
Jaffe.
Yes. How did you know it? Well, it was actually. I mean,
GE fame.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also been attributed to Peter Drucker, but the person that I remember hearing this from, and these were back in the old, back when I was starting my career, was Arthur Red Motley, who was the former publisher of Parade magazine. And I just remember the red part. So whenever I've been looking for it over the years, nothing happens until someone sells something. But I almost think this quote doesn't apply. It's not as relevant as it used to be because what you're bringing to the table now is the ability to say, it's not until, it's like nothing happens, nothing happens until someone sells something, but everything happens once someone's bought something. Like we almost need to flip that on its head. And so I guess I'll let you react to that, but I also would love for you to just talk briefly, and then we'll get into a little bit of fun after this, about this idea of how, in fact, has selling changed? How is it changing? How does it need to change, especially in this COVID-enabled world? Well, there are a lot of things crammed in there, I admit.
Sure, but I'm up for it. So the first thing is it could be everything happens once you solve something. So the idea is that if you're solving something, then it becomes then it opens the door for everything. Because guess what? If I deliver a great outcome, that leads to repeat and referral business, and it creates just that snowball effect where you continue to grow. If you don't deliver great results, then you may not collect from that client, and you're certainly not going to get referrals. So if you want to get referrals, if you want to get repeat business, then you have to deliver great results. How have things changed? Well, I think the biggest thing that's changed really is that things that people used to be able to get away with, poor technique, poor skills, you can't get away with anymore. Because in person, somebody's charm or charisma could often overcome deficiencies in how you approach sales. So maybe you didn't cross the T's and dot the I's. Maybe you didn't make sure you were focused on what was important for the client, but they said, this person's likable enough, it's not my money anyhow, sure, we'll do business with them. in a digital world where I'm communicating with somebody via video like this, the one thing is that the fluff goes out the window. So if you said, oh, we're going to spend 10 minutes building rapport, the person's like, look, I'm not sitting in this Zoom call any longer than I have to. So great, you got a dog, that's nice. Here's the problem I have. Right? They don't really care at that point, and they're focused on what really matters. It makes it so that we can actually have really great conversations about the substantive part of what matters. So there's a concept that we teach called the same side quadrants, and the idea is it's the information you need to focus on in a meeting with a potential client. And the concept is this, that you take a sheet of paper, you divide it vertically down the center of the page, horizontal across the page, creating 4 quadrants. In the upper left quadrant, we take notes about the issue, meaning what is it that inspired them to reach out to us today? What is it that they were interested in solving? In the upper left quadrant, that's where we take notes about the impact and relative importance, meaning what happens if you don't solve this? How important is this compared to other things on your plate? In the lower left quadrant, we take notes about the results or outcome. What are we going to measure together 6 months down the road to know this was worthwhile? And then the lower right quadrant is where we take notes about who else is impacted by this, who else needs to be involved. So they used to teach sellers, well, you need to know who the decision maker is. So people were taught to ask a question to find out about the decision maker. I'm sure someone at some point tried to teach you this. So if you want to find out who's involved in the decision or who the decision maker is, what are the questions that you've been taught to ask?
Yeah, I mean, it's generally sometimes as blatant as who's the decision maker, or
absolutely.
who do you report to, or I mean, it's
absolutely.
But they're so like basic. I see that it's like, tell me what keeps you up in bed at night. What gets you out of bed in the morning? It's like, you can just read my quote on my forehead.
Yeah, and a question like that, someone says, what keeps you up at night? And now the prospect says, my dog licks himself. Now what do you got? Right? You don't have a solution for that. So now you're just fishing for other things.
Mine too. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we don't want to start with that. And the problem is, if I ask the question, who's the decision maker, what it implies is it's almost like saying, so Joe, I realize the company wouldn't entrust you with this decision. So who is the decision maker? It's instantly adversarial. But instead I could ask a question like, so Joe, we talked about the impact of the organization. Who do you think would most directly feel that in the organization? Who would care the most about that? Hey, on this results side, who would have a different opinion about how we measure those results? Mm-hmm. And now we actually get who the real people need to be. But the idea is that having that type of structure and discipline is really important nowadays, because very few people were born being bad salespeople, or very few people were born with bad intentions. It's all things that they've learned. So when people use bad sales techniques, it's just somebody taught them something that they thought was the right thing to do, and then they passed it on, and they told 2 friends, and so on and so on. And that's the way it's worked. So instead, what we have to do is kind of take a step back and say, look, when we go to a meeting, here's what our goals are. Here's the type of information we want to collect to know if it's a good meeting, because most people, what happens is they come out of a meeting and they say, oh, Joe, I had the best meeting. It was amazing. It was incredible. The meeting was supposed to last for 20 minutes. Instead, it lasted an hour. And man, the 2 of us, we just clicked right away. And the meeting went so well that we've concluded that next week we've already set up a time to meet again. And that would be a great way to describe a meeting that was set up on Match.com. It's not a great way to describe a business meeting. But those quadrants do give you insight as to what's a good business meeting and what isn't.
Well, I think it's time to retire Arthur Red Motley's quote, and now we're going to replace it with everything happens when you solve something, Ian Blue Altman, as opposed to Ian Pink Altman, because it was salmon, the salmon moose,
exactly.
which was your shirt. Now I have the perfect segue into our Zoom after show, which is you've actually. And it's so interesting, by the way, because I guess that's a connection back to Ron Tite, which is your love of improv. But you've actually created a game or a very engaging way of role playing. I think what we'll do is we can actually use that or do a little demo of that in the after show. So if you want to see this in action, this little role playing, this very engaging, interactive way of collaborating with integrity, come and hang out with us in the Zoom after show. But we just got a really interesting question from David Libby, and he said, at what point I think this is a great question, at what point does the seller know that the customer and seller are on the same side? Like, how do you know when you've kind of won them over or you've been won over?
Well, so what I would say is this, is that what I want you to do is think of like when you go to a doctor, how does the doctor know that you've understood what their diagnosis is? How does the doctor know that you've understood what they're recommending for a treatment for a given condition? Well, the way they know is not by what they tell you, it's based on what they ask, and if they ask the right questions, then you demonstrate that you understand that. So in many cases what happens is people instead, they tell the client that, oh yes, this is great and this is a really important thing for you to solve. And instead of asking questions like, so what happens if you don't solve this? And what's going to happen is they're either going to convince you that this is worth solving or they're not. And the challenge is that it's a very hard thing because many people in sales, if the client can't convince you that this is worth solving, then you feel like, well, then maybe I should convince them. And that's a trap because there's an old adage, you can't push a rope. So if the client doesn't feel that this is a problem worth solving, analogous to if the patient doesn't believe that their condition is really requires treatment, then you can't keep trying to push the treatment if they don't think they even have that condition. And so the idea comes down to really the questions, and it's, are you getting the right information in your client's words? Not, are you telling yourself a story that you believe but maybe nobody else does?
It's like I can't help you if you won't help yourself, or if you don't believe that there is a problem, right? If it could be someone coming into rehab, right? You've shown up, you've shown up at the clinic or at the facility, but if you don't believe there's a problem, ultimately you may go through the motions, you may get the sale, you might actually go through the treatment, but you're going to relapse, to use a metaphor.
Yeah. And sometimes what happens is people will, they want so badly to make the sale that they'll start to believe and make up their own story for it, but it's not going to happen. And I'm sorry, what's...
No, I was saying, Jen was basically saying when they say, let's do it.
Well, and it could be that, and keep in mind, if you follow this approach for sales, where you're understanding what the issue is, what the impact importance is, and the results, and who else is involved or impacted, then what happens is at the end, the great closing line, which the term closing we should extinguish anyhow. If there's anything cancel culture needs to address, it's the term closing. Because we're opening a relationship, as Jim Cathcart says, we're not closing anything. So if if anybody knows they're being cancel culture, text them and say, look, this is what you got to cancel next is the term closing, because we shouldn't be doing that. But if you've done this properly, your big line or your big question at the end is, so would you like our help? Because you're not saying, so do you want to buy our stuff? You're saying, okay, so you've just explained to me and convinced me that you have a problem worth solving, and together we agree that we can actually deliver the results that you need. So would you like our help? It's not like the doctor says to you, so what's it going to take for me to get you into this prescription today? The doctor says, so would you like this treatment? Yeah, okay, great. We can start it immediately. It's the same thing.
We're gonna end with this idea of helping. Obviously, we're gonna go next door. You're gonna give us a little demo. We're gonna play around. Maybe I'll have one of someone who's on the Zoom after show. They can actually role play a little bit.
That's great.
But you've been very gracious in terms of demonstrating helping is the new selling, and you're actually offering free access to a course, right? Grow in Crisis course.
Yep.
On your website. I put the URL below. It's same site, sellingacademy.com/grow-in-crisis. Just talk a little bit about what someone might get by going and enrolling in this.
Yeah, so for starters, you don't get spam or attacked forever and signed up to some ridiculous list. When coronavirus hit, people kept saying, well, what's different? How do I adapt to this? What do I do if I'm talking to people via video? How do I find out if this is a client who we need to wait on, or if there's an opportunity, how do we qualify into this crazy environment? And so I created this course. It's got 3 different lessons in it on growing crisis. And the first lesson is one of the points I make is that you should be helpful, not opportunistic in these times. And so it would have been a little cynical if I had then charged for this course. So instead, we're making it available to people who are watching today, where they can get access to this course. You'll get an idea what's in the academy. You can actually even play with the same side improv in there, and you'll have access to those pieces. And it just gives inside of each lesson, there's a worksheet. There are other resources that you can access. So it's a full-blown course. It's not just like, oh, someone recorded something in a garage in 10 minutes. You'll see it's a pretty well-developed course.
Well, Ian, the time flew. It was. I'm gonna enjoy spending time going back and extracting all these nuggets, because there were so many. But we're going to spend the next 30 minutes together at the Zoom after show. So for the rest of you, you can watch on Facebook. You can come join us. Just go to the link, bit.ly/CoronaTV after show. This has been Ian Altman. You can find out more about him at ianaltman.com. Follow him on the socials, Ian Altman. Ian, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm very grateful to Ron for recommending you.
Joe, thanks so much. You asked amazing questions, and thanks for guiding me along the process.
Yeah, it was fun. All right, well, let's go on next door, and I'll be back tomorrow, guys. Bye.